On a scale of bold proposals ranging from introducing the GST to changing the formula of pizza shapes, this one's right up there. It's a new proposition to get more of these guys into our parliament in the name of Democracy Manifest. Have you ever thought, Australia, we don't have nearly enough of this?
Take me to the April sun in Cuba.
Or this. Or this.
A curry for the country, I love it. I love Indian food.
But couldn't we all do with a bit more of this? Well, you're in luck. A bombshell report by the Joint Standing Committee of Electoral Matters has suggested supersising our federal parliament by up to 49 MPs and 4 senators to reduce malapportionment and improve the ratio of electors to MPs.
Please explain.
The real argument comes down to proportionality. One vote, one value. In other words, in a democracy, my vote should be just as valuable as your vote. But what's happening is that the bigger states are getting underrepresented.
In Australia, there are currently 151 members of the House of Reps. That's one MP for approximately 114,000 voters. Compare that to the UK, where a single MP represents an average of just 72,000 voters.
Shut up a minute.
Just look at how packed it is for these poor pommy pollies.
Shut up and
Unlike us, when we opened our new parliament in 1988, it was designed with 6 times the floor space and room for 240 members of the House of Reps to give us the room to expand. But in the 4 decades since, the size of MPs' electorates has grown by 74%, while the Parliament has only grown by 3 seats.
Do you know your local member of Parliament?
I do. How can't you put me on the spot now?
Good question.
Yeah, no, I don't, no.
But increasing the size of Parliament is a controversial call.
It does seem that the coalition is highly suspicious that Labor and the Greens and the Teals would benefit. We'd get more people from the smaller parties and a greater ability for independents to get in.
I don't think we need any more because the ones that we've got ain't much good anyway.
These politicians did their work. You know, do we need more? They cost a lot of money.
So is it time for a poly bonanza, or do we make do with this democratic deficit?
Well, the wink. Amy Remeikis already spends most of her time amongst our politicians. The poor thing. But she's with us now. Hey, Amy, do we really need more pollies?
Well, I mean, it depends who you ask. If you ask me, no, I think we've got more than enough, and I certainly have had my fill. If you ask people who are trying to get a meeting with one of their politicians and can't, they would probably say yes. So really, it depends on which side of the spectrum you sit.
Right, so for those who work with them, no, I take it, that being you. But it's an interesting argument, right? So we know trust in politicians is falling. There are studies that prove that, as recently one out of the ANU in Canberra. I wonder if that could be a function of the fact that there are so few of them relative to us, and so we don't have access. So they're less in touch with us at a local level, that they don't represent us perhaps in as direct a way. Do you think more pollies could actually build trust, I suppose, is the question?
I mean, it's an interesting point that you make, but again, it depends like whether we're going to just see more politicians from the two-party system, which is what we've seen when we've seen this decline in trust. So if we want politicians to absolutely represent us and our views, then you'd probably need a more diverse range of politicians. And I'm not sure whether the two major parties are delivering that. So it would depend on whether there are other things in place that would allow more people to stand for representation of those communities outside of the two-party system.
Oh, it's not a great look, though, is it? I mean, lots of people out there, they're struggling to make ends meet, losing their jobs, and the government is saying, you know what we need? We need more taxpayer-funded politicians.
Well, it's not just the government saying it, it's a committee of the Parliament who are saying it. Parliament House was designed to expand, it was designed to see more representation, but we haven't seen that, and that's because the community kind of goes, the last thing we want is more politicians. If we're actually going to do this, we need to have a serious conversation and think about representation, what we want our Parliament to look like, what we want our representatives to do, and what we're willing to put up with.
The committee that you mentioned is made up of politicians, though, which I think is kind of weird. Like, I'm a stand-up comedian. I don't want more stand-up comedians to take my gigs, right? But are politicians the right people advocating to have more politicians?
Well, I mean, politicians are probably the only people who would be advocating for more politicians, and it's kind of their job. It's their job to kind of come up with ideas for our democracy and see whether or not we support them. Not all of them are terrible, and some of them do actually come from the community. The idea of fixed terms, for instance, so you don't have politicians in charge of when elections are going to be held, is another idea that gets floated around at times, but politicians have to decide whether or not it's something that we pick up. So again, it comes down to what the community wants and what they're going to tell the politicians they would like to see. When it comes to more senators, that's something that I think people in the ACT and the Northern Territory would support. When it comes to having more politicians in general, well, that's an entirely different question.
Entirely different indeed. Amy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
I like it, I think. I think it's exciting. I think more politicians, might mean more elections, more sausage sizzles. So that's
Now we're cooking,
You
literally.
want more material for your funny segments.
Well,
That's what
exactly,
you
because
want.
think about all the press conferences. Like, if we imagine if we had 7 Bob Catters. Can you imagine how good this
All right,
country
you got
would
me
be?
over the
We'd have to make
line.
this a 2-hour show. Is what we'd have to do. Hey, I think you're on the opposite side to the way that people generally vote, though.
Yes.
This is a piece of trivia from Australian history that we've kind of forgotten. So you know the 1967 referendum?
Of course, think about it all the time.
I'm sure you do. I suspect you actually have a bit because of the voice referendum. This was the one that included Indigenous people in the census, 90% vote, whatever. And we talk about that like a landmark. There were actually 2 referenda that day, and that was the minor one. There was another one on the same day that would have increased the number of politicians in the lower house, and Australia said no. And so this is the front page of the Sun Herald from the day after the referendum. And see at the top it says, it's yes to Aborigines, but Australia says no on Nexus, because that was the big story of the day. So obviously history looks at it in a very different way. But the lesson from that one is if you ask the people, do you want more politicians, the answer they will give you is no.
We could lose a layer of government, couldn't we?
You get rid of politicians.
Yeah, like a whole layer
Who
of
would go
government.
first?
Well, I'm kind of tossing up between the states and the council, local government.
Even get rid of that. I'm like Prime Minister and then nothing until Parent-Teacher Association. That's it.
It's wild.
Smaller governments.
So just the Prime Minister.
That's it.
On his own.
Yeah,
Albo.
sort it
So
out.
much work for the poor Prime. He's busy enough. This guy's flying around the world. Now he's got to pop into your neighbourhood.
Free.
I just love the idea
the moon,
of Albo
Sam.
getting our bins every day because there's no local council.